Hello, and welcome to the Vlogging Pod. One of the more interesting political argument isn't that Save American Act or Save America Act for their earlier Save Act proposal would only affect Democratic voters. Some analysts argue it could also create problems for Republicans' own coalition, particularly in rural America. Here are the main reasons people make that argument. Rural voters are less likely to have access to required documents. If proof of citizenship requires documents like a certified birth certificate or a passport, some rural voters face practical hurdles. Long drives to county office, fewer DMV or government offices, older residents born at home or in small hospitals who may have more difficulty locating birth records, lower passport ownership than in suburban areas. Since Republicans tend to perform very well in rural counties, critics argue those burdens could reduce Republican turnout along the Democratic turnout. Older Republican voters could be affected because Republicans generally have strong support among older Americans. Some voting law points out that many elderly voters no longer have their birth certificate readily available. Some were born before modern record keeping. Replacing documents can take time and money. That means some reliable Republican voters could encounter the same obstacle the law is intending to impose on fraudulent registrations. Married women are not all Democrats. One of the most discussed criticism is that women who change their last name after marriage may have documents that don't match. That doesn't justify or just affect Democratic women. Millions of married Republican women, especially in more conservative and rural communities, also changed their names decades ago. Critics therefore argue the law doesn't distinguish between parties. It could affect many Republican voters as well. Republicans themselves have raised practical concerns. While most Republican leaders support requiring proof of citizenship, some Republican election officials and strategists have privately worried about implementation. Their concern isn't necessarily opposition to the goal, but that creating extra paperwork could discourage infrequent Republican voters. Older rural conservatives might simply skip registration again if asked to produce documents. Close elections could be affected even if a small percentage of reliable GOP voters don't complete the process. Those concerns have been reported alongside the broader debate over the bill. Rural Americans are less likely to hold passports. Passport ownership is subsequently lower among Americans who don't travel internationally, including many rural residents. If passports become one of the easiest proof of citizen documents, critics argue that suburban, and wealthier voters may have an easier time than many rural voters, again, potentially affecting Republicans disproportionately in some areas. The counter-argument for supporters of the Save America Act that only U.S. citizens should vote federal elections, requiring documentary proof is a reasonable, secure measure. Most Americans can obtain the necessary documents, and inconvenience is outweighed by increased confidence in election. So the disagreement isn't really over whether only citizens should vote. It's already federal law. The debate is over whether the documentation requires would accidentally prevent eligible citizens from registering or updating their registration, and whether those effects would fall on both parties of voters. Today's sources come from CBS News, What is Save American Act? Associated Press coverage of the Save American Act debate. BBC News explainer on the Save American Act. Reuters reporting on the legislative and political debate. Thank you for listening. Until next time, bye-bye for now.